You've felt it before. That moment when you're surrounded by people, yet you feel completely invisible. When you're saying the right things, doing the right things, following every rule you were taught, but something inside whispers, this isn't working. You scroll through your phone at 2 a.m. watching people who seem to have it figured out, and you wonder, what do they see that I don't? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your brain has been running on someone else's software your entire life, and until you see the code, you'll never rewrite it. Section 1. The prison you don't know you're in. There's a psychological phenomenon researchers call confirmation blindness. It's the inability to see patterns that contradict what you've been taught to believe about yourself. Think about this. When was the last time you made a decision, a real decision, that wasn't influenced by what someone else would think? Most people can't answer that question, not because they're unintelligent, but because their entire decision-making process has been hijacked since childhood, by parents who meant well, by schools that rewarded obedience, by a culture that confuses fitting in with belonging. This is level 1 awareness, what psychologists call survival consciousness. At this stage, every choice you make is filtered through a single question: will this keep me safe? Safe from rejection, safe from failure, safe from standing out. But here's what nobody tells you. The behaviors that kept you safe as a child are the exact behaviors that keep you trapped as an adult. That urge to check what everyone else thinks before you speak, that's not wisdom. That's a survival mechanism that expired 15 years ago but still controls your nervous system. Section 2. The performance trap. There's a second level of awareness that looks like growth, but is actually a more sophisticated cage. Call it performance consciousness. At this stage, you've realized that intelligence has value, that being seen as smart, successful, or enlightened opens doors. So you start collecting degrees, opinions, vocabulary that makes you sound impressive at dinner parties. You can quote the books, you've watched the TED Talks, you can explain cognitive biases to your friends while being completely blind to your own. This is what researchers call the emotional mirror trap. You reflect exactly what you think will earn approval. You become so skilled at reading the room that you forget you have an original thought in your head. Here's the test. Can you hold an unpopular opinion in a room full of people who disagree? Not argue for it, just hold it. Feel it in your chest without needing to convince anyone. If that question made you uncomfortable, you're still performing. The cruelest part of level 2, you feel superior to the sleepwalkers at level 1. You think, at least I'm awake. But you're not awake, you've just learned to dream with your eyes open. And now a question that might sting: how much of your personality is actually yours? And how much is a carefully constructed response to what you believe will earn love? Section 3. The cold calculation. Something shifts when you stop needing applause. Level 3 awareness, strategic consciousness, emerges when you realize the world operates on incentives, not intentions. People don't respond to truth, they respond to what benefits them. At this level, you start seeing the invisible architecture of every interaction. You notice who's being flattered and who's being managed. You understand that most conflicts aren't about the stated issue, they're about fear, status, or wounded ego. This is where you become effective. You stop wasting energy trying to change minds and start channeling it toward outcomes. But strategic consciousness has a shadow side that almost nobody talks about. When you view every interaction as a transaction, something inside you goes cold. You start calculating the value of relationships. You trust less because you assume everyone is calculating too. Research on Machiavellian intelligence shows exactly this pattern. Individuals who develop high strategic awareness often score lower on emotional intelligence tests, not because they can't read emotions, but because they've disconnected from their own. You become excellent at moving chess pieces, but the board feels empty. Here's the trap: you can be brilliant at navigating systems while having no idea who you actually are underneath the strategy. Section 4. The burden of force. Beyond calculation lies command consciousness. At this level, you stop just reading power dynamics, you create them. You develop what psychologists call generative agency, the ability to shape reality through sheer will and competence. People at this stage don't wait for opportunities, they manufacture them. They make decisions that others are too afraid to make. They carry weight that others refuse to carry. This is where the world notices you, where you're present. See Phil's rooms, where people follow you not because you manipulated them, but because you represent stability in a chaotic world. But here's what the world doesn't see. The operator is exhausted. Because when your power comes from presence, you can never disappear. Every victory demands another victory. Every responsibility births more responsibility. The empire depends on your energy, and the moment you falter, the wolves circle. I've watched brilliant leaders burn out this way. They think they're building freedom, but they're actually building a more elaborate prison, one where the cell is made of obligations and the walls are made of expectations. And here's the paradox that breaks most operators. The more you achieve through force, the more force you need to maintain what you've achieved. There's something beyond this, something counterintuitive that most minds resist. Section 5. The Invisible Hand. Influence consciousness represents a fundamental shift in understanding. At this level, you stop trying to push reality and start learning to pull. Think about this: every time you force someone to do something, you create resistance. The energy required to overcome that resistance is exhausting and temporary. The moment you stop pushing, they push back. But what if you could make them want what you want? Not through manipulation, through understanding. This requires a level of psychological insight that most people never develop. You need to see beneath the surface of what people say to the fears and desires driving their behavior. At level 5, you stop being the most visible person in the room. You become the most invisible. You understand that direct credit is overrated. What matters is whether the outcome happens. But this level comes with a cost that almost no one discusses. When you spend your life understanding others, you can lose connection to yourself. When every interaction becomes a psychological puzzle to solve, you forget how to simply be with someone. The invisible hand is powerful, but the invisible hand is lonely. Section 6. Beyond the game. The sixth level of awareness, systemic consciousness, is rare. While most people are playing the game, the systemic mind is designing the board. At this level, you stop thinking in terms of individual victories and start thinking in terms of structures. You understand that human behavior is mostly a function of environment. Change the environment and you change the behavior without ever having to change a single mind. Think about the architects of the attention economy. They don't care what you argue about. They care that you argue because argument generates engagement and engagement generates revenue. They designed a system where the conflict itself is the product. Reaching systemic consciousness requires you to let go of something most people cling to, the need for personal recognition. Your name doesn't need to be on the building. Your fingerprints don't need to be visible on the outcome. You fall in love with structure itself, understanding that the right system will produce good results for decades after you're forgotten. This is terrifyingly rare. Maybe 1 in millions genuinely thinks this way. Section 7. The Final Level. There is one level beyond all of this. It requires subtraction, not addition. At level 7, sovereign consciousness, you step outside the entire hierarchy, not because you've mastered it, but because you've seen through it. You realize that everything, the strategies, the systems, the endless games of power and influence, are all projections of an ego trying to feel safe. At this level, you stop needing to win, not because you've given up, but because you've realized the game was never real. Research on self-awareness shows that the highest levels of human consciousness are characterized by paradox. You become more effective by caring less about outcomes. You gain more influence by releasing the need for it. You achieve more by doing less, but what you do is exactly what's needed. The person at level 7 is like water. You try to grasp them, they slip through. You try to fight them, they absorb the blow. You try to manipulate them, and they reflect your manipulation back to you. They have nothing to prove. And because they have nothing to prove, they have nothing to lose. And because they have nothing to lose, they are impossible to control. So here's the mirror. Where do you actually stand? Not where you wish you were, not where you tell yourself you are when you're feeling confident, but where you actually operate when you're tired, stressed, or afraid. Most of us oscillate between level 2 and level 3, smart enough to see the game but still performing for approval, or clever enough to strategize but too paranoid to trust. That's not a judgment, that's a starting point. Because here's what nobody tells you about this journey: you don't climb by learning more, you climb by unlearning. Unlearning the need to be right. Unlearning the need to be seen. Unlearning the survival programs that made sense when you were 7, but are destroying your life at 37. The system you grew up in wasn't designed to help you reach the top. It was designed to keep you at level 1, productive, compliant, and too busy to question. Every level beyond that is a rebellion, a quiet, internal rebellion against the programming you never asked for. The question isn't whether you're smart enough to understand this. The question is whether you're brave enough to live it.